and I want to talk specifically about natural testosterone to begin with. But before we get there, if I could just ask you to explain, why do you think that testosterone is something that all men should be interested in, not just the men that want to build a great physique or have an interest in bodybuilding? Why should everyone care about their testosterone?
So I've been saying that testosterone is the fuel of the man. It's not just for men that want to get jacked, and have big muscles or big pecs or big biceps, but it's about vitality. And actually, low testosterone is linked to lower survival rates, and men thrive because they have higher testosterone during the teenager age. And as testosterone declines after the age of 40, each decade 1%, then we have all the clinical symptoms of hypogonadism, that means testosterone deficiency, that leads to fragility and aging. So depression, obesity, erectile dysfunction, insulin resistance, that links to cardiovascular disease, of course, metabolic syndrome. Even prostatic cancer is a fact of low testosterone, unlikely what the medical community believes. So men after the age of 40 or 50 should check out testosterone levels, and if they are really low, and what low means apart from the symptoms, that is below 50%, they should consult a physician in order to restore those levels, in order to have better survival rates.
One of the dangers of low testosterone you mentioned there is cardiovascular disease. Now, I think for a lot of people that don't understand this topic too well, they might think the opposite. They may have been told the opposite, that really high levels of testosterone or TRT could be linked to cardiovascular disease. But you're saying the case is if you have low testosterone, you're at risk.
Yes, you pointed out well. So if you abuse testosterone like we abuse any kind of drug, we have side effects. So abusing testosterone like in bodybuilding, yes, it can create issues like high blood pressure, low HDL, which is a good cholesterol. Now, well, testosterone is more innocent rather than the anabolic steroids, but even the abuse of testosterone can create issues. The point is, who talks about abusing? We're talking about optimization, and what differentiates the drug from the poison is the dose. Now, optimal testosterone obviously supports a good basal metabolic rate because it supports the lean body mass. Now, the more muscle mass you have, the leaner you are. And if you lack of testosterone, that means sarcopenia, muscle wasting, then visceral fat develops, which is the fat that hidden in the stomach, okay, in the abdominal cavity, that leads then to inflammation. And this, of course, leads to diabetes, then it creates obesity, and together they establish the metabolic syndrome that goes directly to cardiovascular disease and cancer. So if you have low testosterone, we are fat, and this chronic obesity can lead to inflammation, and cancer, of course, is a result of chronic inflammation.
And for people who say they haven't gone out, they haven't got their testosterone levels tested, what are some sort of symptoms or markers that they can point to recognize that they may have low testosterone? What are some typical symptoms of someone with low testosterone?
Yeah, so the three main symptoms are fatigue, lack of stamina,
Mm.
and lack of endurance. Then it's lack of sex drive, that means the urge in order to have an intercourse. That, of course, is linked also to erectile dysfunction, which is another symptom. And then, of course, uh, um, we have the depression. So depression is another clinical symptom of low testosterone. And unfortunately, many psychiatrists have not already discovered this, and they give you more SSRIs that lead you deeper to testosterone because SSRIs may elevate prolactin, which is inhibitory to testosterone. So if you're sad, if you're tired, and if you have lack of libido, these are the main facts that you lack of testosterone.
You mentioned earlier that once you hit the age of around 45 to 50 that you should think about getting your testosterone levels tested. Is there an age, an optimal age, or can someone at any age start looking into their testosterone levels? Maybe 20 years old, 30 years old. Is it in an age that's too early to start caring?
Well, you could say that the boy is not a certain age, but it's up to the symptoms because I've seen to my practice youngsters of late 20s that, of course, live recklessly. They booze, they sniff, they stay up all night, they eat lousy, they don't exercise, and they have testosterone around 300 that equals the testosterone level of somebody who's 70 years old. So it's not classic that when you go 40, you hit the andropause. But of course, even temporary, you may have low testosterone levels that reflect to the way you live, okay? And of course, we shouldn't check out just numbers because we're more than a number on a piece of paper. We're clinical symptoms, okay? I mean, we're a variety of difficult symptoms that I just described before. That, of course, when you look at the numbers, they reflect to each other, and then you have the diagnosis.
You mentioned the young men and alcohol. In terms of lifestyle factors, what effect does, say, excessive drinking of alcohol have on testosterone levels?
So alcohol produces estrogens to the liver. That estrogen there then are inhibitory to the brain for testosterone production in the testicles. Also, recreational drugs like marijuana can elevate prolactin. Lack of physical exercise makes you fatter, of course, and fat is also inhibitory. Then some products like soy, which is practically estrogen, can elevate your estrogen and then can inhibit your prolactin, your testosterone, sorry. Um, and of course, sleep is very important because the optimal sleep from 11 to 7 is the ideal timing for testosterone to be built up. Also, of course, being vegan is not a good thing because you lack of certain elements like iron and zinc and B12. But certainly, zinc is very important for the biochemical reactions in order to make the so-called steroidogenesis.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there, I guess. Before we dive into things like sleep and diet and exercise, in terms of testosterone levels, if someone was to go and get their testosterone levels tested, what is, say, for a 20 to 30-year-old male, a healthy testosterone level? What does that look like, and what is a
Well,
sort of worrying number?
I would say below 50%. So let's say the scale is from 300 nanograms to 1,000. I would say that you cannot make your dreams come true if you have 450. You're kind of miserable, you know. So at least 50%, 500 is the mid range, and you should hit over the mid range. And according to me, all men out there in the society, if they check out the levels and they are below 500, then um, unfortunately, they're not aware of that because they're not well informed, and they are searching for treatment um, to other medications like SSRIs and like drugs that treat erectile dysfunction. But treating erectile dysfunction with Viagra or Cialis, for instance, does not leave the problem from where it starts. So you may have a false erection, a pseudo erection, but you don't have the urge to have sex, which is the sex drive. And I would say that testosterone just not for sex or for lifting weights. It's in order to be optimal, to be optimistic, in order to have stamina, endurance, okay, and to feel vital and healthy.
Why do you think that when people go to the doctor with, say, as you mentioned, their low sex drive, erectile dysfunction, why don't sort of mainstream doctors talk about the subject of testosterone?
Because they're misinformed, because there's prejudice and skepticism about the main androgen that comes from bodybuilding, from the abuse, the idea that testosterone is linked to cheating in sports. And we can speak another thing that, according to my theory, it's kind of conspiracy. I'm sorry. that the society and the big pharma doesn't, I mean, no, the big pharma doesn't want the society to have a good levels of testosterone because in the absence of testosterone, they give you a plethora of other drugs, okay, like treating diabetes, treating erectile dysfunction, treating depression, treating even osteoporosis. That surprisingly, the wonder drug, which is testosterone, can treat all of the symptoms. Okay, so if all men are having high testosterone, I don't think so that the hospital will be filled up with all men with low testosterone. Okay, so perhaps perhaps testosterone ruins the big pharma sales, and that's why doctors hate testosterone.
Do you think with some of the factors you mentioned earlier around new diets like vegan diet, which has become more and more popular, soy products, which you've mentioned, sleep, which tends to be sort of neglected in this day and age due to, social media addiction, etc. Do you think we're creating a sort of a generation of men with low testosterone?
Yes, I think that this generation has lower testosterone than the generation of our fathers, and the generation of our fathers has lower testosterone than the generation of our grandfathers. So there's a decline in the hormonal levels, and we see those levels in the paper. So recent labs have a range of 200 or even 150 with 700, the lowest and the highest rates. While 50 years ago, half a century ago, in the 70s, it was actually 1500 to 500. So there's a decline process. And unfortunately, we compromise with this downhill process. And now we expect a man to have a 150 testosterone in order to be diagnosed as hypogonadric, that equals to a lousy lifestyle. And actually, the symptoms start below 500. So we need to compromise with this, and we need to hit levels that equal feminism. All right? 50 years ago, in order to be diagnosed as hypogonadric, you need to have levels of 450, below 500, okay? So this is something pathetic, but unfortunately it happens because statistically, that range comes out of people that may be sick. So today's numbers does not reflect that equals to health, okay?
Yeah. So the goalposts are shifting with each generation then.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. With all the men that come to you for advice and help on testosterone, what have you found to be the biggest reason for low testosterone in men? Is there a common reason that stands out more than others?
The kind of diet which is inflammatory. Now, drink water from plastic bottles that have been exposed to the sun releases estrogens that, of course, lower testosterone. The lack of physical activity, because 1 century ago there were no elevators, there were no remote controls, there were no vehicles, there were no, even machines that were working up other farmers in the fields. So a man was more physically active and leaner, which is more healthy in order to produce hormones. Okay, of course, back then there was no electricity, so men were sleeping from night till dawn. That means it was a perfect circadian rhythm, unlike now that we're making the night day and we're working like mouses, 24/7. That literally toasts our HPDA, which is the testosterone production in the brain.
So something really interesting you mentioned there about plastic bottles. Now, a lot of people wonder about this and have this debate on what is better for you out of, say, drinking out of a plastic bottle or drinking unfiltered tap water. In terms of your water intake, how do you get and source your water?
Well, personally, at home, I have always a filter. But when I want to drink from the refrigerator, I always have glass. Okay, glass, yeah, which is of course healthier. And if I have to drink in plastic, then I watch carefully not to be exposed in the sun. Okay, because it's a nasty experience if you drink from water. You have, of course, gastrointestinal issues. You get diarrhea and severe stomach ache. But mostly, I mean, it's the xenoestrogens that are released that may lead to low testosterone levels.
You touched on sort of electricity and technology. I wonder that with today's generation being exposed to all this technology, social media, smartphones, tablets, TVs, everything like that. In terms of the sort of radiation they're exposed to, does that have any impact on testosterone levels that anyone has found?
Yeah, well, the radiation may affect testicles, okay? So testicles are very sensitive also to heat.
Hmm.
Testicles practically they're hanging out of the body because they cannot tolerate heat. So tight jeans, underwear, steam bath, sauna, jacuzzi can all have an impact on the scrotum, which is the balls, okay, the sac that uh, surrounds the balls. And apart from low testosterone, many men today suffer from low fertility, which is called um, um, hypo, hypogonadism, includes also the low fertility, which is a problem because men are not easily fertile today, and unfortunately, they seek for IVF treatment in the clinics. So radiation can affect testicles.
And in terms of fertility, again, this is a subject that a lot of people are interested in. What ways can someone sort of naturally boost their fertility or chances of having effective fertility?
Well, a good way to boost fertility is to take zinc and vitamin E. Zinc, of course, improves the hormonal profile, and vitamin E can improve the speed of the spermatocytes, which is a semen, because it improves the motility of the flagellum that the sperm cell has. Um, and so this is what I provide to a fertility protocol, apart from the hormones, HG and HMG. Then I tell them to take zinc and vitamin E that are very important for the sperm production, but also the movement of the sperm cells.
You've touched on this already. You've mentioned a few food types and diets, but in terms of foods that you think would sort of kill someone's testosterone, foods that you think have a net negative effect on testosterone levels, you've already pointed to soy. What other
Soy,
foods?
yeah, soy and alcohol, that's the main two things that kind of course, fried food, which is inflammatory food because it releases trans fat,
Hmm.
and then it creates the visceral fat, and visceral fat then releases inflammatory cytokines like TNF and IL-X. So fried food, alcohol, soy are three examples of not good food that kind of improve the testosterone levels.
And in terms of foods then that support high testosterone levels, are we talking about just a simply a high protein, low carb diet?
But actually, steak and eggs are the perfect foods that are very nutritious and contain the key elements, which is cholesterol, actually, in order cholesterol to synthesize testosterone. But of course, the egg yolk and the red meat contain a plethora of elements that are important in order to synthesize biochemically testosterone molecule.
And what would you say to people that when they explore this type of diet, they have concerns over, high protein diets being sort of highly carcinogenic foods?
Well, red meat difference, okay? It's different to eat pork, lamb, for instance, rather than grass-fed red meat.
Yeah.
Another thing is that skipping greens and the vegetables is not good for the colon, which is the bowel, the large intestine, to absorb and assimilate protein. Okay, so it's unhealthy because from one point of view, protein is acidic, so you need to alkalize it with the greens. And second, it leads to constipation if you just eat red meat without greens. Okay, so yes, they have a point on that.
You touched on sleep earlier. I wonder if we could just dive a little deeper into that. So, in terms of optimal sleep levels for testosterone, what would you sort of prescribe as the optimal amount of sleep to be getting each night?
Certainly 8 hours, so 1/3 of the day, but what matters is the optimal timing of sleeping, and this is before midnight, so from 11 to 7, from 10 to 6, for instance. Okay, so we cannot. I've been talking with people that work night shifts, and they say me that the lack of night sleep is not restored no matter how much you sleep during the day. So it's the proper circadian rhythm. Okay, 11 to 7 or 10 to 6, not 12 to 8. This is not appropriate.
And in terms of, say, supporting a good circadian rhythm, does that involve getting, say, sunlight at the right time? So when you wake up, making a beeline for natural sunlight and just following the pattern of, the pattern of the sun rising and falling.
Exactly. So the more light you get during the day, the more likely you're going to produce melatonin at night. And you need, of course, to shut off any technical light during that night because it will shut off your own production of melatonin. So right after you have a dinner at 9 o'clock, the latest, then you need another 1 or 2 hours in order to digest this. And then gradually you need to shut off any electric devices from 10 p.m. Okay, have a shower, of course, and the temperature in the room shouldn't be over 20 or below 20. Should be a cool place in order to start the initiation of sleep.
And pairing that sort of exposure to early morning sunlight with, say, I don't know, a 20, 30-minute walk, is that something you would recommend? And is that part of your morning routine, is when you wake up, getting outside, getting an early morning sort of fasted cardio in, paired with some sunlight?
Yes, I've been doing also fasted cardio because it helps you to burn fat, but also physical activity, of course, improves the blood flow. And it's a healthy approach starting your day with a fasted cardio. Okay, and then have your breakfast. It's a very good routine.
You talk in similar to sleep, and you talk about the timings being important. Is it important to consider the time in which you eat meals? Is there a sort of set pattern in which you personally eat your meals throughout the day?
You should eat them all meals the same day every day. This is what makes the system to realize there's a certain process here. Okay, so well, I'm against the fasting, but I support the taking the equal amount of calories from fasting to spread them throughout the day in order to keep the basal metabolic rate and avoid fluctuations in insulin. And of course, the fasting then closes the risk of wasting muscle. But to me, yes, high protein, low carb is what a man should consider after his 50s. Of course, fasting has no place if you don't lower the calories. So you need certainly a caloric deficit in order to follow the fasting. But yes, you should have your breakfast, which is the most important meal of the day because it breaks the fasting. This is how breakfast is coming, the etymology. You should have, of course, your lunch and your dinner. These are the three meals, and then you can throw two small snacks. So 9 o'clock, 12, 3, 6, and 9, the five solid meals throughout the day. Okay. And of course, you should check out the total amount of calories because as you age, you need to eat less. We know that small dogs live longer, and 2,000 calories is a good amount of calorie in order to maintain a good basic metabolic rate, but also is a good number in order to avoid creating fat.
One thing we haven't touched on yet is exercise. Are there, say, specific types of forms of exercise that are more geared towards building good testosterone levels than others? I'm talking, say, your typical weightlifting as opposed to cardio.
Weightlifting, which is an aerobic, okay, and also another anaerobic way to do the cardio is the HIIT, the high intensity interval training. So you need to avoid the cortisol excess that comes from prolonged cardio, okay, from the endurance. So the prolonged aerobic exercise. But lifting weights can increase the growth hormone on the age of one and the testosterone for a brief period of time. okay, under the production of lactic acids that is anabolic then to the hormones.
In terms of you specifically, because you've had success in the bodybuilding world, I wonder how your personal gym training has changed over time. Say, if we go back 30 years, how different does the way in which you train back then differ to the way in which you train today?
So as I age, I try um, to protect my heart the most. So I want to do more reps, okay?
Okay.
Instead of lifting massively and super heavy that I used to do in the past. I want to do also more cardio. I want to stay leaner. I want to stay more fit cardiovascularly. So avoid the maximum reps or the low reps, okay? I want to protect, of course, my joints. I want to avoid the straining, ligaments and tearing in discs or in tendons or in ligaments or even in muscle bellies. So I train more cautiously and I don't necessarily watch out how much weight I lift, but how I lift it. And of course, I leave in the door my ego because it's not about a competition, but it's about maintaining your health.
That's interesting. I see a lot of sort of young men in the gym who are they follow the philosophy of say low reps but high weight. Are you saying that that is putting yourself more at risk in terms of heart health?
Well, as you age, yes, but when I used to be in my 20s or 30s, of course, I followed that route, and you need that massive weight in the rep range of 8 to 12 in order to create muscle development. But as you age, you think differently. You don't do risk exercises like deadlifts, okay? Or perhaps you follow the Smith in order to do squat or bench press in order instead of lifting free weights, because after 30 years of lifting, you're more fragile to injuries.
So is it, say, important as we age to really think about our training in terms of functionality just as opposed to exercises to pack on muscle?
Yes, size matters, but in your youth, okay, it doesn't matter. And also, it's not healthy to stay big after your 50s. I've not seen a professional bodybuilder after his 50s. Well, there are a couple of two exceptions, but it's not healthy to maintain such a size, okay? So you need to stay lean and healthy and functional, of course.
In terms of exercises that are good then for your functionality as you age, if we say you could only, for the rest of your life, use five exercises to focus on, your with functionality in mind, what are the five exercises in the gym that you would prioritize the most?
Well, I'm not following now functional training like the CrossFit,
Yeah.
but technically it's a very good exercise to be engaged, the CrossFit, because it hits not just the strength, but also the explosiveness and the VO2 max. Okay, so yes, from perspective of bodybuilding, you need to do the five basic exercises, which is bench press, military press, um, squat, deadlift, and rows perhaps. But as you point out, well, you need to follow the functional training. Okay, and go for interval training. So high intensity, low intensity, and repeat this within a minute. Okay, this routine can help a lot of the basal metabolic rate, but also your cardiorespiratory capacity, and of course your physical condition.
Well, I'd like to move, as we start to sort of wrap up, I'd like to move into the sort of the testosterone therapy. And why do you think that, say, when men get older and they maybe do need the assistance of testosterone therapy, what do you think puts people off starting it? A lot of people are afraid of the subject, afraid to consider the option of using it. Why do you think that's the case?
They shouldn't be afraid of the use of testosterone, but they should be afraid to consider the side effects of low testosterone.
Hmm.
But low testosterone makes you ill. Low testosterone takes you closer to death. Okay, low testosterone equals higher mortality rates. And unfortunately, the bad name comes out of bodybuilding and athleticism and competitiveness and the abuse of testosterone and anabolic steroids, which is another thing. But we're not talking here about 1 gram of testosterone per week. We're talking about 100 milligrams of testosterone, which is optimal. It can create you youthful levels instead of have levels of 80 or 90-year-old men that living in their 40s, which is, of course, a very bad example.
What do you think are some of the biggest myths around testosterone?
The cardiovascular disease and the prostatic cancer. So both of them are debunked, and actually low testosterone takes you to both of them. So the lower your testosterone, the fatter you are, and takes you closer to diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And actually, thankfully to Professor Morgenthaler from Harvard University, low testosterone makes you more vulnerable to prostatic cancer and prostatitis. So statistically, men who develop prostatic cancer have low testosterone. And I've been saying for quite some time that bodybuilders are the worst case of testosterone abuse. Nevertheless, they don't die of prostatic cancer. Okay, and how many people are receiving testosterone worldwide? I would say it's less than 1% globally, statistically. Now, men who develop prostatic cancer belong to the 99% that don't take testosterone. Okay, and men that are fat and develop heart attacks, unfortunately, have low testosterone levels. And also during the COVID years, the men who were rushed into the hospital in the ICU, if they had low testosterone levels, they had less chance of survival rates, because when you enter the hospital with low testosterone, you have a big stomach. This stomach is full of toxins equals to visceral fat that releases inflammatory cytokines that participate to the inflammatory cascade of the virus, okay? So actually, the opposite occurs. Low testosterone takes you closer to cardiovascular disease and prostatic cancer.
Wow. Well, two other things that I think scare a lot of people around testosterone therapy are effects on fertility and mood swings. What would you say to those two?
So about the mood swings, it's very dramatic and impressive, the transition from depression to, let's say, happiness, yes, of a man with low testosterone when he receives testosterone and says, I don't need SSRIs anymore because testosterone makes me happy and very optimistic. Okay. And now, you asked the other part of the question was?
Fertility.
And the fertility, yes. Indeed, androgens can make you infertile. The point is, if you know how and you have knowledge, which is power, you can avoid this, like myself, that I became a father at the age of 50. I've been using testosterone for 1 decade now as TRT. Of course, back 20 years, also anabolic steroids, but now I was using HCG in order to avoid the testicular shrinkage. And unfortunately, many urologists hesitate and avoid the initiation of the TRT because of this. The point is, if you know how to avoid it, there's no problem with that. So implementation of HCG along with testosterone avoids testicular shrinkage and infertility.
So one of the final questions I'd love to ask you. So if we put testosterone aside, what are some supplements that you take regularly that you think could benefit most men out there today?
Definitely you need supplements that can help your heart. So the omega-3 or the krill oil are the good essential fatty acids. Of course, you need creatine monohydrate, which is very important in order to improve your maximum strength in the muscle contraction. Okay, the creatine monohydrate. You need, of course, a whey protein or a protein blend in order to support your lean body mass, your muscle tissue. You need, of course, a multivitamin. That is also important in order to support a good metabolic rate and avoid any kind of malnutrition. Of course, there are many supplements that can improve different tissues like lung or liver or prostate or heart. So we go to deep water into that. But what I told you so far are the basic stuff for a beginner.
Yeah. I think that with creatine, this is something that I think there are a lot of myths around creatine, and people are reluctant to take it because they think it's related to things like hair loss, etc. But most professionals I've ever spoken to all suggest that creatine is one of the most important supplements you could be taking.
Well, literally, creatine is the only supplement that you're not gonna waste your money on. It's the most anabolic supplement. Okay, it improves the ATP synthesis, but also it anabolizes muscle because muscles are composed 70% from water. So taking creatine that influxes water into the muscle also makes a better volumization of the muscle tissue. So muscles look fuller. Also, creatine is very good for the brain, actually, for the brain metabolism. Yes, it can improve your thinking and your cognitive function. But the point is, if you overdo it with creatine, then you spill out the water into the subcutaneous area rather than into the muscle. That's why there is a fear of getting bloated with creatine, right? You can take, of course, creatine by the red meat or the fish, and the liver also and the kidneys can synthesize a very small amount of 1 gram per day. But I would say it's the only supplement that it definitely works, the creatine monohydrate.
Oh, amazing. Well, thank you so much for that. And please let our audience know before you go, where is the best place they can find you and your work? Where can they follow you on social media? Do you have a website? Where should we send everyone to find you?
Yeah, I have a website which is the gtoul.com, which is both in Greek and English, but they can find me, of course, in social media, Facebook, Instagram, X, and LinkedIn by my name, okay? And they can also find my books on Amazon. I've written 4 books in English and one in Italian translated about bodybuilding and fitness, all right? And on my website, of course, they can find also my number. They can text me on WhatsApp or Viber in order to approach me.
Amazing. Well, I'll make sure all that is linked in the description below, your social media, your website, where they can get the books and more. George, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. It's been a pleasure to speak to you.